All right, we're getting started. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is the South Stoner Prairie Neighborhood Steering Committee. I think we should go around and do introductions before Steve kicks it off with his presentation because Kaylin is here from CARPC standing in for Jason. So I'm Brad Sipple, I'm the Community Development Planner for the City of Fitchburg. And then I will pass it over to Carol and we'll go around the room this way and then we'll go to Zoom.
I'm Carol Poole, I'm the Plan Commission rep for this committee.
Robin Loger with Your Materials.
Me? Okay. Caitlin Shanahan with CARPC.
I'm Brad Valscatter, I'm with MSA.
Steve Trumlin with MSA.
And then Meredith.
Hi, Meredith Shelton, resident at the Elan Apartments over at near Fitzrona and Lacey Road.
And Chad.
Hi everybody, Chad Weezy, Deputy Superintendent for the Verona Area School District.
Bill.
Bill Bugles with Painadole, and I'm sitting in for Clint tonight.
All right, thanks everyone. Today we have on the docket a brief presentation from Steve from MSA on the progress so far and some of the public input that we've received. We just had an open house for this neighborhood plan yesterday here, had some good discussion, so I'll kick it over to Steve to start that. And then we'll talk about the land use concepts after that. So.
Thanks, Brad. So, just refresher, we had a couple of steering committees. This is the third one. We had an open house at the beginning of the process that was combined with the Greenfield neighborhood. We've had key stakeholder interviews, online survey we had open and closed today. We left it open and extended because of the open house we included last night that we had to try to give some feedback on the concepts for our discussion today. After this will be the Development Focus Group next week. So that's going to be some development related specialists. That could be realtors, that could be people that have done development both in housing and business park to kind of give the market analysis of our direction on some of these concepts. Because the ultimate goals from this conversation and these is to kind of build towards a more refined concept that's not bubbles and actually would have blocks, street blocks that would be by land use type at each half block, meaning you could have one street showing one type of land use, that behind that homes could be another land use towards another street. So that's the kind of detail that we'll get to in the next round, which will make sense once we go forward. So that will be discussed at the May 30th is our tentative schedule for the next meeting. We set up both neighborhoods to be on the fourth Thursday. In May, there's actually 5 Thursdays, so that's how we're trying to coordinate that into the week prior to this would be Greenfield. But moving forward, we'll look at 4th Thursdays every other month. So before we get into the bubble diagrams, we want to talk a little bit about what each of these acronyms that we're using in here stand for. So we got low density residential, so that's single unit, duplex, triplex, fourplex. There's some variability. We can talk about densities between 2 and 5, maybe more than 2 and 4 is what's labeled here. But we're talking about quarter acre lots and larger for single units. We could talk about potentially deciding on what larger actually might max out at, but right now just noting that's what that means. Medium density residential is single unit, duplex, triplex, townhomes. And typically that could be from 3 side by side, attached up to maybe 6, could be 8. We can talk about that. Small unit, multi-unit buildings, we could be talking about 8 or 12, but typically we're talking about a 2-story structure in those cases. And so the typical density we're talking about is 5 to 9 units per acre. For single unit residential, what does that mean? That means smaller than quarter acre lots. High density residential, that again is what I want to reinforce. When people hear high density residential, they purely think about the multifamily apartments. But there are some type of developments, even down to single family. That top image shows where if you have a 1/10 of an acre or a 1/12 of an acre lot where your alley served for your garage, That still meets the same for high-density residential, where you're looking at 10 units per acre. But you can still have a duplex, triplex, townhomes in there. But then, yes, you could have larger, medium to large multi-unit buildings as well. Neighborhood mixed use is labeled in here. When you think about that, typically you're thinking vertical mixed use, meaning there's a ground floor retail with residential above. But we're trying to be a little bit more flexible on that term. That could be a standalone commercial property, could be a standalone high density residential building, or it could be that vertical mixed use I mentioned. It could also be horizontal on the same lot, meaning that middle image shows where there's a commercial building on the same lot as that multifamily that's behind it. So there's still a mix of uses on a lot, but they're not in a single building. But we would typically want to put some restriction on the idea of, you know, how big a commercial space could be in this, because we're trying to provide, again, we talked about that healthy and balanced neighborhoods where you can have walkable retail to homes, but you want it to also be in the same context. So currently we're suggesting even 25,000 square feet would be kind of the largest type of building. Commercial isn't actually listed in the bubbles that we have right now, but another potential use is general commercial. And then you see that could be gas station, that could be office, that could be retail, daycare facilities. Right now, we're not really identifying that. Again, neighborhood commercial is more restrictive to fit in the neighborhood. I don't believe initially that we think these uses are ideal for this neighborhood, but we can have that conversation if we want general commercial. There is a concept that has business parking, kind of growing from what's to the north here of office buildings, could be showrooms, warehouse, industrial. There could also still be retail that actually is supportive of the jobs and the employees that work in those businesses. Then there's institutional utilities that covers the gamut of from schools, government buildings, to even potentially solar farms, which exist to the east of this neighborhood. Park and recreation and stormwater and conservancy are two separate things, but both can allow for trails and stormwater management. But the Parks and Rec obviously could include playgrounds and other recreational facilities. So that's a very overview, real quick, and we can go back to it if you have questions, but kind of frames some of the bubble diagram land use. I'm not going to spend much time in here, but just to remind you that we had that open house in December. We had about 80 people, but really only 18 went to the breakout session specific to this neighborhood. And there was interest for diversity of housing types. There were concerns of traffic and see a need for additional shopping in this area. And some questions about the views of the quarry lands. Online mapping, very similar themes, by adding that they want to provide shared use paths connection within the neighborhood, missing middle affordable housing, preserve some of the farmland to the south, and connections to natural features. Property owners that we talked to as part of the stakeholder involvement, as you can see there is 5 owners in this area. By the color coordinator you can see, really they're looking for what is the highest and best use for the land, working with the city to determine that extraction is going to happen over the 5 to 10 years from now. So some of these properties are going to be a little bit before they get to the horizon that we're talking about, but we still kind of set the stage of what that use could be as it develops. School district noted there will be some capacity issues, but they have a plan in place, including some lands that are to the east that they own, and there is some conversation that maybe a school could be in this development. So you'll see one of the concepts includes a potential school site. So last night's public open house, we had roughly about 25 people. One of the activities was 20-year vision, phrase and words that you could write down here. You can see noted higher density with amenities within walking distance, farmland preservation, mountain bike and natural trails, walkability, affordability, access to public transit, vibrant community within network of urban playground, preserve green space by building densely. Other comments, so we had the concepts on tables and we kind of put a grid on it to say, all right, want to have conversations about the northwest portion, southwest portion, and generally speaking, these are the kind of comments I don't know, Brad, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so these first comments were ones that stood out on the comment forms in terms of being repeated. So connecting to existing bike trails, that was a repeated theme. Having some metro transit, incorporating that into the design, maybe along Lacey or at least parallel to the neighborhood along Seminole or Fitchburg. Preserving the views and open space, there's a lot of topography change, so talking with people around the table, using that to preserve some of the views into and across the neighborhood. Increasing affordable housing options, smaller homeowner lots, and require multiple housing styles. People were talking about the cookie cutter variety of homes, and so varying up the styles and with a variety of different developers and character of homes. Option A was the most preferred due to the housing, because people are feeling the housing shortage, but people were talking about if we build denser housing, could we share the space with the business park use as well? Because that came up last night in the comments.
So there were actually, I misquoted, it was 290 responses on the survey. You can see the variable of age groups that responded here. And notably also that 72% or so live or work within a mile of the study area that responded. Those that did live in the city should note that 50% of them live here for 11 or more years. And then 1 to 5 was about 25% of that, and another 15 for 6 to 10. So quite a bit of years. And I feel that so if you took the survey, or if you didn't, there were some questions about development types, kind of what the initially showed you about those land use types, gave imagery, and asked if it's appropriate in the edges or in the middle of the neighborhood. And then we talked about the actual concepts. So I don't want to taint what I discussed with the concepts, so I'm going to start with the concepts, and then we'll go back to the survey about some of their comments. So I'll give you a little background on the ideas into each of these concepts. And again, the idea was to have each one be relatively different, because the ultimate goal here is likely looking at a blending or a new concept, kind of looking at both of these ideas and what makes the most sense throughout the neighborhood. It's probably not going to be just A or option B. But in this concept, we were really looking at the idea of a full residential neighborhood of mixed housing types with the school. So you see the school in the center of the site. It's kind of a nucleus of developments. I should note that if you know the neighborhood edges of study area, if you can see my little mouse there in the northwest quadrant, these lands actually are already in the urban service area. So again, part of the reason we're doing this project is a lot of these lands are in the city, but are not in the urban service area that would be served by sanitary. So there would have to be an amendment submitted to CARPC and ultimately approved by DNR. So those lands in that northwest has already been brought in. The concept that they showed for that in that submittal showed this type of development where there's a low density neighbor residential swap. They did not have ownership of what there's homes in the MDR area at the intersection there. So we took a liberty to suggest that would be medium density residential versus what's shown in what was in that original submittal for bringing that section into the urban service area. But building off that, if you go south along Fitchburg, bringing a pocket of neighborhood mixed use, and then bringing another pocket of high density residential to medium density residential all the way to the south. And then as you go east there, kind of blending into what is undeveloped is lower density residential. You see that green bar that goes to the middle of the site where the P is? There is a grade change there likely will exist. So the property owner south of that P suggested they don't plan to extract material. So they're gonna be 40 to 50 feet higher on the south side of that green line to what's developed to the north of that line. And so this concept looked at the idea of creating a park around that could utilize that grade change as a unique feature of a park within the city. Sledding, someone talked about mountain biking, you would have to worry about a little bit about erosion control of that. but there is opportunity to think about that. So that was kind of the play there, thinking about that park utilizing that grade change of a unique feature. Then if you look north of there is the high density residential, thinking about the fact that that grade change, that from Lacey Road, it could be down 40, 50 feet. We could bring up portions of it, but that if you have taller buildings, it's already gonna be hidden by the grade change of that. Road network, you see that we're continuing Commerce Drive from the north down south. The circles are traffic circles or roundabouts that we're showing as a potential. They could be standard intersections as well. But you see that east-west street through the middle of the neighborhood. We have to work around what that grade change is gonna happen there. And there is an opportunity to connect to the far east of the neighborhood, but you gotta reach all the way to the edge of the neighborhood to connect all the way down to Grandview. Then you see an additional east-west street that is further south in Fitchburg that connects all the way through, that could connect to Seminole and to Grandview connection south. So that is that potential direction. Now in option B, major focus is about extending that business park from the north on Commerce Drive into the neighborhood, all the way down to that grade change that I talked about with those green lines. But then to the west, you're seeing a change, much heavier density here with high density residential and neighborhood mixed use at the intersection of Fitchburg and Lacey. And then again, building down where all the lower portion shown as lower, low density residential. Road network is similar on the south end, that east-west connection to the low density residential, but instead we're looking at the other connection of Commerce Park connecting right all the way to the west at Tonto, is it correct, Trail? At that location at Fitrona. There's an additional north-south that connects up to the Quarry Vista neighborhood on Lacey as well that you see there. Other note is where I see the NMU off Lacey in the center here, in discussion with the property owner, the scale that is on that property and the facility there is going to remain longer term. And so whatever we showed there, we wanted it to be something that could establish a development in its own. Everything else around it can kind of blend in along that, but the reality is that development's probably going to happen much later than the rest. So I can go to the public comment, but maybe we start with just reactions to what's presented from the committee, and we can go back. I don't know if anyone from the committee would like to have any questions or comments on this.
I have one quick question. Do we have a breakdown based by units per acre of what the maximum housing units would be between the two, between A and B?
We do not. I think that granular will come in the next round more.
Okay.
But we do have acreage, which looks a little pixelated on the far right of what we're talking about of the amount. So if we just touch on that in both, just to give reference, in option A, we're looking at neighborhood mixed use of 48 acres, comparatively 42. So that's very similar in both concepts for that. High density in option A is 88 acres of high density versus 40. So the option A actually has double the amount of high density residential. For medium density, you're looking at 64 in option A to 40 in medium density residential. So again, that's 1.5 times in option A. Part of the reason we're seeing more residential in option A again is because a large swath of that is not business park in this concept. The low density 64 to 78, so those are closer on par because they are mostly on the southern portion. But there is 115 acres shown in this as business park that is not in that initial concept. Yeah, and so the park, while relatively is a little bit larger in option A, mostly because of the gesture of that central park that we talked about, which you lose a lot of land to the hill to that part of it, is the only main difference. So there's a lot of variability in what that total count could be, because again, the neighborhood mixed use, it could be purely high density residential, it could have commercial component to it. We will make some projections of that as we move forward, because again, the idea is that we're going to try to build towards a preferred concept to then start looking at utilities and infrastructure. And so we will have to have a relatively, at least a medium or a range of units. Is that a calculation? That was a long answer, sorry.
No, that's,
I think I could add to that as well. So I think that the units, we haven't gone to that extra step too, because I think that that is gonna require some conversation with the staff as that the comp plan is kind of being considered for maybe adding a couple of densities or some extra uses and to consider. And so we wanna make sure that our diagram, like the numbers haven't been dialed in yet to correspond with what's gonna be in the comp plan. And so I think what we wanna do is make sure that there's some overlap there. And so I think that that's gonna be forthcoming and we'll continue to refine that. So you're not gonna have two competing numbers in whatever you end up with.
the reason I bring it up is because last night, there was quite a bit of conversation on the Plan B, about the possibility of taking the land that's west of Commerce Park and converting some of that into HDR to try to get the unit counts up and maybe make the business park just be more to the east of that road to try to make up for some of that.
So I'll make sure I'm understanding what you heard is that Commerce Park would be the dividing line where the west of that portion would be high-density residential, keep the business park what you see on the east side of that.
Yes.
Okay.
If possible.
Any other comments or questions from committee? Well, do you want to wait till the end?
Yeah, we'll do public comment at the end.
Well, I do hope it will spark more conversation when we get closer to trying to go into a direction, but if you want, wait, Chad?
Yeah, and I think a lot of this will be, I think more applicable once we get closer to the direction we're heading. I obviously noticed Plan B did not kind of squirrel away a site for a school, and I think in general we see more students coming from low density and medium density housing than high density housing, and obviously wouldn't be pouring too many students out of the business park. But again, the school district's definitely interested in having some say in terms of having a spot set aside for likely an elementary or middle school if what eventually gets planned and developed here would produce enough students that would justify it.
Thank you.
Dad, this is Bill Bugles. I think there may be another possibility for a site for a school. My thoughts were down at the intersection of Fitchburg and Grandview at some point. You're bounded by to what will be more major thoroughfares and perhaps, that's a possibility in the future, if not right here.
Yeah, I know that a lot of newer schools are being built on major roads. As a planner, I'm, trying to push the envelope of thinking about it being more, again, still the nucleus of a neighborhood on a collector road. So that it's still not a local road, but obviously that's for further conversation, but that was the intent of really looking at a major collector road through the neighborhood, but being more central. But I agree that some of the conversations that came back is looking further south, but obviously that's outside of our study area.
I would agree, but if it comes out that there's not a site for a school set here, there will be and are opportunities in the future, which might more coincide with when that school is actually needed.
Fair point, thank you. One other thing I should note is, another thing we piggybacked is you see that park to the north of it. There's a nexus of that to reduce potentially the need of how much school property if it could utilize the park adjacent to it. So that was something else we all considered as well.
Understood.
This is Meredith. I just don't want you to feel like we're just sitting at home not participating. The one thing that stood out to me was the comment about the differently graded space standing out and being used as a park. That just stood out to me as something I absolutely love that idea. As a parent, the more that a park space or playground space can kind of stand out and be a little bit more prominent, the better and the more interesting it is and the more fun it is to get to for the kids. And I just wanted to share that.
Yep, thank you. And I note there was someone who came last night to the open house that talked about how there's a park to the north of Lacey, and if you kind of just squint and see the parks, we have gaps between, that could be a continuous stretch with a trail that connects all those as well.
And I would say that on that note too, there's a long history of Madison and the area around it, communities around it, using quarry spaces for children's parks, which there may be some safety issues and things around that. So, but you know, some of those spaces have been, you know, designed to minimize that kind of risk and provide environments for kids to interact with nature, absent like formal playground spaces and things like that. And I know some of them actually double as like stormwater infrastructure and stuff as well.
Any other comments right now? Otherwise, we would go to the survey a little bit and hear more about the public's interest.
While we have the plans pulled up, and since we're going to move into the survey comments, one of the things that came up between the different plans is that this is the option A, the low density closer to Fitchburg and Lacey, has been sort of proposed or at least put forward by a developer. It hasn't been officially platted yet, but there's kind of a preliminary design for the area at that intersection. The area that's already been brought into the urban service area. And so there were some comments last night and a few reflected on the survey about when that was brought in as an urban service area, it was brought in as low density residential. So some people felt that if the city was going to change course and go with option B and provide something that's a little bit more dense, they felt that that was going to be a little bit change of a direction, and they felt that there should be some more process related to that. To make it more above board, because they felt like they had some things that were changed related to that process. And I'm not familiar with that process or things that happened with it, but they talked about that going one way, and they felt like that was a change of course that they didn't agree with, but that was just a difference from what was done when that was brought in. So I just want to make that clear. That was brought up at least four times in the survey, and at least once last night.
This is Bill Bugles. We're the owners of that property and went through the CDP process, and I didn't think that this area that's already in the urban service area was even part of this amendment.
Yeah, Bill, you are right about that, but when we were looking at the South Stoner Prairie neighborhood with the boundary where it is, we thought it would be prudent to look at some of the land, you know, since it's not developed yet, look at it again and how it relates to the South Stoner Prairie neighborhood, just so that we're considering all the options here.
I can understand that. I would suggest that we've, perhaps some minor changes to what we've already developed in our plan for the area would probably be considered or acceptable. However, large-scale changes which would require another CDP, I'd feel that would not be our responsibility from a financial standpoint.
Thank you.
What's the designation for that property on the current future land use map? I'm just curious as to.
I will look that up.
While Brad's looking that up, I will also note that we're showing some areas as open space as well, and knowing that those are points where stormwater management is likely necessary, but there are additional areas within all the bubble areas at this scale we're not showing, and will be part of our process as we move forward. There was, I think, more questions in the Greenfield neighborhood about that, but I just wanted to be clear that this is very high level right now, and the next level of design will be looking at how stormwater will be managed as part of this development area.
And along with the stormwater, like that would, the little neighborhood parks you would probably see, like, you know, every development would have at least a couple of acres of, say, communal open space. It would probably be dedicated, like that wouldn't be shown in there. So those would be additional open spaces that would happen within those circles on top of the stormwater, so.
Which is typical requirement in any development based on city requirements of it's a certain square feet per unit of that development would have to provide park, or there could be a decision of fee in lieu of.
So to answer the question about future land uses there, it is a mixture of residential, business on some of the properties to the north, on Lacey, and open space.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any additional comments before we look at the survey? Since we just closed this earlier this afternoon, it's not fully grasped, but we can kind of together kind of look at some of that. And I should have put it in a nicer frame here. We already kind of touched on demographics of the survey responders.
You hit that Zoom thing, it would go full screen. Down at the page, at the bottom right. Click that, and now you can go full screen.
At the very bottom.
Thank
Read
you.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't know if that's,
Oh,
it's a little harder.
Wow, maybe that won't work, sorry.
Yeah, just because it's a long
Okay.
page. Let me. So we had some imagery. See these 6 images, and we, talked before that. I wanted to give a basis to people who are responding on what the LDR means, and so wanted to show what could fit in that LDR, and you can see different variables of lot sizes. Number 4 is even side by side 2-unit, I believe maybe it's 3-unit townhomes, and then top number 3 is a duplex. So just showing that variability that could exist within low density residential. We asked in each one of these cases, are they very appropriate, okay, not appropriate within the neighborhood? Seeing what stands out the most. Generally speaking, it looks roughly about a third. It says all of them are not appropriate versus, about 60% in all categories say that these are all appropriate. The greatest not appropriate is the 1-acre lot, single family. And next to that is duplex and townhomes at 36% not appropriate. Because wanted to also think about some of these uses might be okay in the middle of the neighborhood versus on the edges. we asked the same question just to get an additional response on these same ideas. I'm not seeing much variability, maybe a little stronger of 75% for some of the uses that are more internal versus along the major roads here.
You can see that the single family around a third of an acre is one of the more popular options that stands out across the board.
Yeah, so if you look at the weighted average, the lowest number is showing that had the most seeming that it's appropriate. Similarly, we look at medium density, then you see a little bit more broad in those fourplexes, smaller multi-unit buildings, it's in 5, a little larger townhome property with number 6, duplex at number 4. And so we are seeing 52% not appropriate for the small multi-family buildings, 45% for fourplexes shown there. Some of these answers are interesting because then when you read the additional comments about the concepts, they're all promoting density. So
yeah, it was.
Take that as a grain of salt.
I was kind of right. So I was writing down notes about this because I read through most of it. And so single family and low density residential has the most support overall, like just in the general survey. And then it goes down about 10 percentage points for every category you consider step up in density. Whereas high density goes down to like 10 or 12%, sort of, it kind of tanks a little bit. So you can, and then business park kind of hits that range as well. So
let's slow down. So
that was, I know I'm jumping ahead, but I was just want to say like the percentages of people that support it, but the comments that you'll read later, or if we get to that or we do the analysis, is that they want higher density to preserve more open space and farming. So it's a bit of a conundrum for us.
But again, I wanted to illustrate in this that high density includes even number 1, which is single family. And I put number 2 in there more for reaction and see where that went. That's much larger. But the other uses I felt are still compatible and could be in this neighborhood. I generally would say I include very appropriate and okay together and then look at not appropriate. So if you're really looking at this, generally speaking, most of them are 50-50 outside of the one I mentioned, number 2, which is much larger, where you had 67%. But yet you have 33% actually says that it's appropriate in some form.
Yeah.
In your experience, how often do you see somebody come in and develop land that is designated for high density at those lower levels? I mean, I know it could happen, but how often in reality does it happen? I'm just curious.
I mean, the reality is if they're approved for a certain number of units, if they bought the land, they're probably paying for that type of unit count. And so it's gonna be advantageous for them to recoup that cost to put in the unit, especially with the fact that there's so much pressure for housing and they can rent them easily. We can talk about, again, in this process, do we want to have some policies and maybe in portions of the neighborhood where that wouldn't make sense in what is considered a high density residential if there is concern? But I would say yes, a lot of times it's generally speaking, they're gonna wanna go with the number of count that they're allowed to do.
Because it's gonna be more financially lucrative for them.
Lucrative or help pay the costs. I mean,
Right.
housing costs have,
It's
construction
terrible.
costs has doubled.
Yeah.
And it's coming down some, but, yeah, it's a fair question. But the intent is to have balanced and healthy neighborhoods that has the whole gamut of housing types. And so there would be interest in my mind that the larger buildings would be on the edges and then you come down from there.
Yeah.
Kind of reinforcing that you do see, when we talk about middle of the neighborhood, these numbers jump up a little bit more on what's not appropriate.
Yes, I think I think what stands out is when you look at the middle of the neighborhood versus the edge of the neighborhood, those are the kinds of decisions that we're making. Some of the comments about preserving the views and other things, the topography, I think that's the problem with thinking in like two dimensions. It's a rolling landscape, and it's gonna be pretty dynamic after it's done quarried in this, in my opinion. So I think that this provides some different options to sort of disguise some of this density in this land use better, as opposed to in Greenfield, where it's gonna be kind of more open landscape there. So I do think that that's the difference between the two neighborhoods. And that the internal land uses, as you're moving further south into the neighborhood, you can blend those two. So the transition, I think, between what's on Lacey Road and Fitzroy Road, the differences between those and the roof responses is kind of what I was looking at, where it belongs in our plan, if that makes any sense.
And then with commercial mixed use, kind of combined them here, but gas station, try to give some variety. Gas station, there's the drive-through, there's, I would say number 2 is a nice liner shops that has a few. 3 is more of that suburban style of mixed use. You might not even notice that is mixed use on that ground floor. And then 4 and 5, you step up in the scale of mixed use and in the responses to those. Strongest against the drive-through, number 6 there, and the largest multi-family mixed-use building. You are not seeing the, it's slightly more than half are still thinking most of these are appropriate and are okay along the edges of the neighborhood. And then business park showing again a variety of type of uses from office to that commercial, and number 2 that can be supportive of those uses. Number 3 is more of a storage and landscaping place versus some more larger or manufacturing building. Number 5, large office building got the most not appropriate, as well as light industrial building. And then it's really 50-50 on the remaining images. If you know, we did not ask about middle of the neighborhood for either the mixed use commercial and this, because likely that is not an option we would really want to consider. So it really was just generalized here. We also had one on open space, parks and farming options. So you see like community garden number 1, you see some farming on an edge of the neighborhood, and 2, open space with trail 3, playground 4, 5, open space with stormwater, and 6, a recreation field. This is where you see that flip on, not a lot of saying it's not desired. 24% felt though not desired to have athletic fields in this neighborhood. That was probably the key thing I see here. Strong interest in parks and playgrounds and paths along meadow and stormwater. Strongest is number 3, 95% if you combine desired and okay and neutral. But generally speaking, everything of interest other than athletic fields. So now this is where we talked about the actual concepts. I'm sorry, I do have to reach out a little bit. Brady, do you have comments specifically on this?
I was just trying to squint a little bit on and get focus a little bit on.
So what the bars mean is green is too little, blue is just enough, orange is too much. So this is with concept 1, or A I mean, where it was no business park and a lot of residential, but with the park and the school. So we're seeing too much in high density residential is the orange that you see in the middle there. Too little on low density residential and open space, park and open space is what we're seeing there. That's about the network, the road network. Majority, no opinion. Roughly the same, yes or no, on So not much to glean there. You didn't ask for open comments. That usually makes the survey go much longer and you get interesting comments. We do have open-ended comments here. Did you have some summarization of
Yeah, so
what they liked about it?
this is what I was talking, even though there's, so there's support for the low density. Obviously, that's the highest supported option. And most of these comments relate to that people like more open space and feel like the quarter acre lots, and so there's support for that type of housing, but there's also in the same comment about they want more open space, and the more room that the housing takes up, the less open space you're going to get. So there's a little bit of a conundrum there. People talked about the amount of green space in both plans as feeling okay, but wanting more. So they felt like if they could increase the density, that they could have more open space. But again, most of the comments were wanting low density housing or lower density housing and things that come along with that, like parks and schools, sort of in their mind. But to have those things and to have some of the things that are mentioned in the survey, people are wanting, you need density to have some of those things, or the people to take advantage of those neighborhood amenities to support them. So the school came up quite a bit in terms of wanting to have something more internal, so appreciating that versus on the edge of the neighborhood. And then there were some concerns similar to some of the surveys that we'd done earlier on the mapping study about what type of impact would this have on traffic in the area and the safety that would have for residents or people that were trying to maybe traverse the trail network or path network across Lacey Road. And I do believe that about sums up again, I mentioned the urban service area amendment for that portion being lower density originally proposed. And that came up a few times on this survey. There was also talk about mentioning about that came up a couple of times, only getting like one shot to develop the neighborhood in terms of like infill and going back and building more density is typically more difficult. And so the person was talking about to build more density here so we don't have to build more dense in the future kind of thing. That came up a couple of times. But that kind of touches on the theme on top of what we already talked about, which is more open spaces and trails and continuing that network. There's already some existing trails, the Corey Vista Trail Network that's across the street, so tying into some of those existing trail networks and keeping with that. On top of bus service, so paired with that, somebody mentioned like if the trail that's pretty close by, having that like close to a bus route as well. That's the last comment that I had about that. Again, I had to speed read a little bit. There's about 90 or so comments, and we just closed it this afternoon. So there'll be a more forthcoming summary of those comments as we group them and dig into some of them a little bit more.
And then this is option B. Get this just right. So again, option B has the business park on the east side with greater amount of density on the west side that offsets it a little bit. Southern half is all low density, no school. Seeing, again, rezoning too little of park and open space. I felt there's too much business park. Positive on the neighborhood mixed use and low density residential, kind of a mixed bag on the densities between. Granted, I'm not surprised from, general responses that I want low density and more open space. I mean, so sometimes we gotta read a little bit beyond that, which Brad was mentioning. So, each tool we're using is part of the equation. and it's not always the answer each individual one. So we just gotta take some things from each of these and think about what's best for the city overall by the policies and goals of the city. Again, road network, most people don't think about that at this scale, but this one actually seemed to have a little bit of a no versus the yes of opinions, but.
I have a question,
Yes.
and I'm gonna preface it by saying that in all of our operations, we value our neighbors and do the best we can to enhance their lives. But in terms of the comments and opinions that have been turned in, do we have any idea how many of them either have an interest in these properties that are being considered, that is ownership, or are potential developers, or are potential purchasers of property in these developments?
We did not ask those questions to keep this more open-ended and anonymous, but I would likely suggest with only 5 owners in this area that the majority are just residents. It could be visitors. It could be, we're not restricting this to only respondents from the city of Fitchburg. So it's general public comment that could happen at any meeting. So I would assume majority is not the categories you spoke to. So that's why I go to the point of that. This is just one tidbit of information that should be considered, but there's other elements that might weigh heavier.
I see. So are there, do you put a weight on the, how can I say it, status of the remarks or comments as far as where things go?
We, in planning analysis for like open-ended comments and more qualitative data, it's harder to analyze in terms of put some quantitative numbers on that. However, what we do is develop themes around that and start to talk about how many times something comes up, and that's the way we typically do it. It's called grounded theory, whereas we don't look to have a preconceived notion of what the survey is going to say, and we just look for themes that are in there. So the longer comment may have 5 or 6 things that we parse or pull out of it, but that's not to say that that person's going to get like 5 votes. It's just that those are the 5 things that are mentioned in that comment, and so each one of those kind of gets a say. If that makes any sense, I could definitely talk to you a little bit more about the sociology behind some of that, but there's really not a hard science behind that type of qualitative analysis.
Again, I'll add that Fred's comments in the first round was one thing is stated about the density, but then also stated about the other things they want, and so part of that will be framing the discussion about if you do one thing, you can't do both. So you gotta think about how we can blend to, try to make a neighborhood that fits the majority of what's stated. But there's other factors. Market, landowners, as you're mentioning, have a big say in what happens here. And so we do take this advice, or we listen to it, we find ways to incorporate or answer to some of the things that are desired here. But there's other factors that are more important, but it's not a weighted 50%, 70% of answers. That was a roundabout answer there. I liked your answer better. That's teaching right there.
I understand that, but I guess as representative of one of the owners, we would, and we're certain that we will, that it'll come back to us, because if we're going to continue to try to develop these properties, we need to have a feel like our voices are being heard and that we're going to be able to be profitable. I know that that's a bad word, but that's the way the world works.
And I appreciate your comments, and that's why you're on the committee and also was interviewed, and all those pieces take to the end result. And again, the idea of what we presented here are two different ideas, and the idea in some of it was to get reaction. And so, not suggesting either is the final response. So, I do want to hear what everyone else says, and you're going to recommend, hopefully, the end result as part of the committee.
Well, thank you for listening to my comments. I am aware that as I get older, I get a little bit more, how can I say it, protective of what's ours. So please excuse me.
All good, thank you. Do you have a summary, Brad, a little bit of
Well,
this one? This is concept B.
Yeah, so on the second concept, there were really only 2 additional comments that really stood out in terms of the business park added to that. People felt that they really didn't like the business park use, so they wanted a bit more neighborhood separation if there was going to be that. So they were talking about if we built denser, could we have more open space and separation between the business park? Again, that's talking about we can't have low density and more open space and that type of thing. So the idea of the competing interests, building density with one of the uses, so we could have maybe the business park continue on in that eastern portion, and the fact that this lacked a school, which that came up quite a bit in terms of they felt that a neighborhood of this magnitude probably should need a school, and those were the only 2 comments that were really any different than the other one. There were a bunch of repeats from the previous in terms of traffic and people feeling it was too dense, but not having enough open space at the same time. Those types of comments came out again. And this is the concept where the urban service area amendment comment, where the northwestern portion, we're sort of considering that and a change of use in that Fitchburg and Lacey area. That was where that came up in this portion. So, but we still would need to dig into these, and again, we'll do that kind of analysis, and all this stuff gets included in the appendix as well. So all those comments and everything, and we even included a summary of the landowner comments as well. So we try to incorporate all of the different aspects into that. They can't all make it into the body of the report, but a lot of the stuff makes it into the appendix so that people can understand that their voices are heard or embodied in that report.
Well, then we did ask the question at the end here about taking everything into consideration. What option do you prefer? Generally, you've seen 52% of the respondents option A, 28% roughly of B. Likely, based on what we heard in the comments, it's all around the business park equation, which unless you're looking for a job in that type of field, you're probably not promoting business park in the neighborhood. But if you take a step back and realize, well, there's not a lot of opportunity right now to build business park within Fitchburg, and this is adjacent to additional to the north, it is part of the equation that should be considered that some general public would not support, but might make other reasons be importance for job creation. And again, the idea of balanced neighborhoods is not only just having a variety of residential, but it's also walkability or close proximity to jobs and commercial shopping.
That was the biggest difference I noticed between the 2 plans, is that Plan A is obviously very residential focused, and Plan B has a lot more use options in it, which, I think as the city has to decide what is the actual need for business park space, how much do they need, is that the right acreage? can we shift some of that acreage and add more residential? You know, and is there a way to, or is there a way to morph a business park area into Plan A? Or more commercial uses, so that, I think that the neighborhoods need to be balanced. And I think having all of those different opportunities in each neighborhood, you know, makes it a more complete neighborhood. It makes it a little bit less auto dependent, if you will, until Metro can get out there, which may be a while. You know, and another interesting thing I would like to see is the people who want more Metro in that area is, where are you going to? You know, is it even feasible that Metro would get you there within 2 hours? You know, I mean, it's a realistic question, so, you know, it's like, it can connect you to downtown, it can connect you to here, but, you know, I was looking at, could I take the bus to an appointment, and it was a difference between 10 minutes and 2 hours. It's just not realistic. So the other thing that I would ask is, I think I recall the gentleman from Verona saying that high density doesn't tend to generate as many students as the low and mid density do, because there tend to be more families in those units. So, you know, if we add more high density in areas, does that lessen the need for another school? Because selfishly, like Bill, I can look to my own experience, and my Verona school tax is through the roof. And the thought of building another school gives me a lot of heartburn, to be honest with you. So I don't know if this would generate enough revenue so that it's not going to increase the tax burden in some of our lower income neighborhoods in Fitchburg that are paying higher rents and higher property taxes already because the Verona School District has grown so quickly. You know, is there a way to do this neighborhood where maybe we don't need a school right away, and then we can go to Bill's point where if it's needed later on, it can be added to the south?
One thing I'll add to that point, which I mentioned, I think the last time we talked about the school district conversation, is that the projections right now do not even include development of this area. That capacity issue is actually assumed without any development here. And so the reality is, unfortunately, it's gonna get to capacity if you don't do it here. It's gonna be in another neighborhood. You won't be able to slow down the interest and desire of Dane County, unfortunately. So it's just a question is, do you build in a school site to be part of that nucleus of the neighborhood in this development or further south?
So then my question would be, is this school in addition to the one that's already planned for north of PD for this side of town? Do we know?
I believe, Prairie, one is about a high school and the other one is about an elementary school. Both are gonna be needed at some point.
Sounds right.
I believe that, I believe that conversation, that they're two separate
Yeah,
types.
Yeah.
and I wanna
I mean,
remind everyone about the, you know, probable timeline for this neighborhood build out too. I mean, we're looking at probably at least 10 years before that area is available, 5 to 10 years before, at least before that would be available for development, and there'd be, you know, consideration of some housing there and a school to serve it and everything, so.
Yeah, the business park land would be tied up with the quarry permit for at least the next 5 years, once they start that process. So the land that would probably be developed first is currently either the LDR land or the neighborhood mixed use land that's already in that urban service area. So that's probably the most relevant, which is why we kind of roped it in here, because this development, if you don't consider that's kind of an island of it to itself. So we took some liberties there after, you know, talking to some of the landowners and the staff about considering that. Thinking that's going to impact, you know, the interest or what happens further into this neighborhood there.
So again, hearing all this, I don't know if that brings up more questions or comments, but what we're trying to build towards here after this meeting is to start looking at finer detail of blocks based on some of these land use categories. We are still gonna have the development group, focus group on, I think it's April 2nd, so that might have additional feedback at that point that we could share, assume via email would be okay on that. But I'm looking for maybe more direction, if you're willing to share some of trying to, what you like on each one, a certain quadrant, generalities about it. You know, what I've heard so far is I'm feeling like it's something of option A with inclusion of business park. That's the main part I'm really hearing. And there's been a lot of strong interest in that middle park that utilizes that grade change. But don't let me direct you one way. That's just what I'm hearing. So tell me if you hear otherwise or think otherwise.
You know, we discussed at our meeting, I believe it was our last one, we did ask about, this would be for Mike and Joyce, what you have for inquiries as far as, people that are looking for sites in the business park. Do you have any idea?
Do you want me to respond?
Yep, Joyce has the inventory, the summary that we've gotten from WEDC and ManRep as far as inquiries.
And Bill maybe can even comment on this too, because we've had to reach out to him.
Sure.
For some of our inquiries, because we don't have anything. So we're already looking at land that's truly not available for business park, but they happen to be a willing landowner that's looking to sell. But most of our requests, the minimum acreage is 25 acres. And the max is probably, well, we had one that was 1,200.
An outlier, yeah.
So
The
I would
max
say
is
25.
100?
Oh, no, it was 1,200 was the max. But I think what we have to keep in mind too is our business park is not a hindrance on our community. It's not heavy industrial. We're very conservative and very picky about what we respond to and who we work with to protect our community. So it's a bit frustrating and don't take this wrong, but I feel like the survey maybe was a little slanted, if that makes sense, because when you put up a 4-unit and you say, what do you think about this? Well, right away, this community is gonna think, oh, those are all rentals. So if you would have put your question like, if these were owner occupied, I bet most people would be happy. And they're talking about affordable housing. That's how you get affordable housing, is by having more units to bring the costs down, because land costs so much. But sorry, I don't mean to go on a tangent, but you know, that's kind of the way it is. We don't have the land for industrial.
We need clean manufacturing, light industrial, and even good 10+ acre sites. And it's not just for sometimes new prospects that might be looking, but it's a challenge for us sometimes to stay ahead of our existing businesses that are looking for sites as well. And that's where Payne & Dolan's been a great partner with us to meet some of the needs of our existing businesses, just because we've been scrambling, trying to find sites to take care of them and accommodate their growth needs.
And if you took that one step further and you said, this business right here, the average starting wage is, you know, $60,000 a year, and it's a plain building, there might be a different opinion on how people answer things. So I think sometimes it's, you know, you have to tell the whole picture. And sometimes I feel like some of these exercises, and based on some past, it doesn't tell the whole picture. You can't look at a building and say, do you like it or don't you like it? They need more information.
What does it bring to the table?
Yeah, like, you know, the gas station was a pretty decent example because you have 2 different kind of styles and construction, but I think that's kind of maybe a little bit better way to get a true feeling from the community. And I feel bad when I hear the community, but I don't see any business owners at the table. And to me, they're unrepresented taxpayers. because they're not here. They're not getting their voice heard, and they're an intricate part of live, work, play, and building our community. So, end of sermon. It's almost Easter.
So question related to that, Mike, do we allow daycares in business parks? Is that an allowed use? I don't remember.
Not in industrial zones.
No.
Is that
Well,
something
hey.
we could look at though? Because if
I
we're gonna
think we
have,
do. Because Pike Technologies had one.
and I know there's one over by.
But it was a conditional use based upon, wasn't it that the children in the childcare had to be
Oh, the workers.
workers' children?
You're asking about, could there be independent daycare, not necessarily associated with a particular company or entity there?
Either,
Mhm.
but I think either is important, because if we were to go with a plan like Plan B, I think it's important to have, if we're gonna have an employment center, we should also have daycare opportunity.
Mhm.
And the other thing is as a parent, I always wanted my daycare close to my house, not close to where I work. Because if there's 6 inches of snow or a foot of snow and I'm driving home, I would much rather pick up my child in my neighborhood than pick them up where I work and have them be at risk during that commute. And I think there's a lot of people that feel that way. They don't necessarily always want their daycare near where they work, but they might want it where they live. So if we could find a way to somehow morph these two plans to where we could have a place to work, a place to eat, a place to live and play, and have all of those in one spot. I think that's what we're really looking for in complete neighborhoods, right? Yep.
That's why with the neighborhood mixed use, there,
Mm-hmm.
that could bring us the daycare
Right.
use in close proximity, because if you look to the north of this, in the Fitchburg Business Park, you've got Pooh Bear Daycare.
Yep.
They're in the southern end along Seminole Highway, so you have some commercial uses at the corner. Then you move down and you've got industrial kind of in the middle, but you've got a daycare in very close proximity to the neighborhood over there.
I mean, it's gonna be a reality if we're putting this much density with residential housing in here. I think there's gonna be a demand.
Here, I'll also add on to your point about people wanting it closer to their home, there's also, with more work from home, jobs, that's.
Yep.
It kind of enhances that too.
So do we have,
I'd like to point out that
I don't,
Oh, Bill online.
yeah, well,
Go ahead, Bill.
we can change
am I
the zoning too. I mean, it's not,
I would like to point out that this neighborhood doesn't need to be developed or limited to what's being considered right now, as there is about as much property between the southerly limit of this plan and Grandview Road. So I think we don't want to limit ourselves to the idea that this neighborhood is going to be limited to what we see right here, but this is about half of what the future neighborhood will be.
Bill, can I ask if you're taking that step further, are you suggesting that where we're kind of extending low density at the edge to the south is that blending piece that you're suggesting that, well, there's going to be additional development all the way another quadrant of this to the south, that the intent of low density is not really dropping down to low density and then it's farm field, it's going to be developed further south likely at some point. Is that your point, or can you also note more what you're saying?
Well, my point is that I can see in the not too distant future that there will be a need to extend urban services all the way down to Grandview Road, and at that point, those lands will be essentially part of this neighborhood. So, excuse my dog.
He's not happy.
Oh, he's all excited. He must see a squirrel or something. But in terms of the things Carol was speaking of, in terms of uh, stores, restaurants, daycare, whatever, there, in reality, there's a lot more land um, available in the future that should be considered in the molding of this neighborhood. I think perhaps we don't want to look at limiting ourselves to this being a neighborhood all by itself. I would think you'd want to have this whole, I say, mile square property or whatever it is, as one neighborhood.
Yeah, fair. I spoke about neighborhoods could be multiple plats and could be, up to even a square mile. I guess what we're looking at here is Fitchburg and Lacey over time is gonna have additional traffic build, which could provide the opportunity of uses that are higher density or more intensive development. The question is more, as you go south, is that still higher density, or does it, as it's shown in this one, go down to low density? Yes, there's gonna be future neighborhoods to grow. We're working on the one that's to the east in Greenfield. And the question came up last night about that, the open house, about are we kind of evaluating both of them of like, is one getting one need and the one seeing another need? And my response was that we are taking comments and direction from all stakeholders and the public, and that plan right now is showing a lot more lower density and even an agrihood development type, which would be clustering homes around farm fields, and we're still talking about that concept and how that can move forward or not in the plan, but the idea that this one is showing more density because the general comments out of some of the surveys says otherwise, but generally have been, let's show density here, and that makes sense, so.
And I'm not suggesting the need for more high-density residential. My only point is that I realize we're looking into the future, but that's what this is all about. And I don't, in my opinion, I think that making this mile square or whatever a place for people to live, go to school, work, eat, have a place to take care of their kids, recreate, could be here, but it doesn't all have to be in what's in front of us right now.
I would say the direction has been to make those walkable and bikeable. So, part of a complete neighborhood is at this scale, it does make sense. So that's at least planning practice opinion about how these neighborhoods should grow now versus the single use developments that has been the last 30 years. But that's for a conversation to continue.
Okay, I'll be
Do you
quiet.
have any comments or thoughts?
You're looking at me?
Sure.
I don't have anything that immediately jumps out. I'm new to the process and just kind of trying to get my bearings.
Sure.
If I have anything, I will speak up.
Sounds good.
I like hearing all the other comments.
Well, I'll just mention that Al Brizak, the Edgewood College rep that's on the steering committee, did send a few via email before the meeting since he knew he wouldn't be able to be here. I'll just summarize those quick. He said he likes the idea of the school space and that he thinks it'll be important for the area on option A. And likes the central location of the school because the centrally located schools tend to make it a hub for the neighborhood and create ownership by the community as well as kind of facilitate participation in school activities. Likes business park on kind of in the outskirts of both. Would like to see business park on the outskirts of both options, and then the roads and green spaces and kind of the flow of everything makes sense. So.
Did he comment in any way about interact, like the land that's sort of like abutting, like what, like that will be part of the Edgewood campus in terms of like how
Not in any, no, no, not really.
okay, just making, I didn't know if that was.
Well, if we don't have any more comments in the committee, do you want to open it up to our lone general public?
Sure.
I had about 5 different things to say. The lady there hit it on the head. Bill hit it on the head, and she just ended it where I was gonna start, so I'm just gonna say, I think, first time being here, now that I'm retired, you'll probably see me more.
Oh, that's the answer right there.
And see, everybody asked me if I moved, where would I move? And I says, the sorry part of it is, I says, it won't be Fitchburg. Won't be Dane County. I'm gonna take the mass exodus leaving Dane County. And it's the property. I mean, if you believe what was offered for my property, you drop your jaw and hit the floor. These people are nuts. Developers are filthy rich. $1 million is like 100,000. So I'm watching, and I tell everybody, I'm not moving until it's too late. But it's nice to hear what's going on, and I like that there's people that kind of think like I do. But I'm a taxpayer, citizen of Fitchburg, and I don't have an agenda. I like to sit where I am, so. But I do like what I heard from you guys, and this plat here is flat, which is a whole lot better than where I live in Greenfield. So a developer can just go wild. And in order for the developer to make money, a profit, like Bill says, the developer is only going to make profit at high density, 15 units to the acre. That's the profit margin. Most of the people that come out looking for a house is looking for a house with a house on it, with like 20 feet on both sides, nice little backyard, nice small front yard. Don't find them in Fitchburg. Those are obsolete. So, I mean, I come down, forget that down the road again, the road out there between the business and that new subdivision, which I haul a pipe to. When you go down the street, the businesses look pretty, I mean, nice. You go down the street, and that subdivision is medium high density. That looks like a nice subdivision to live in. And now it's got a park and stuff. So I mean, I'm watching this stuff because as Greenfield goes away and high density runs out there, I'm looking at what you guys are doing at an open field, which looks nice. So there is room for high density, but the average family moving out, they want a house, with 3 bedrooms and a garage and stuff like that. So, but what I see here on this next 20 years on this one, it does show it. So, and the other thing, when the commercial keeps on going out, is there a limit to where you guys have you're saying, okay, commercial, you can, here it is, you have all this, we can meet that. Do we have a line like that at all, or is it as you go? It's not too many people are gonna be wanting to have houses around where they hear businesses running all the time.
I mean, in the bubble, we're showing potential commercial uses. That would be in the NMU sections here. So that's localized to those, and I think in what we're hearing, again, that it's more directed at this concept with business park included. It's similarly, again, just in those red areas that it would be localized, if this were to carry forward as a preferred concept.
And see, not to get off track, but when Hard Tongue sold off that front part, everybody in the Greenfield and in that area were going, huh? They're gonna build apartments. It was already set up to be commercial. So they had it, Hartung had to take it, or the developer had to take it out of commercial. That would have been a beautiful spot for a brand new big business.
It wasn't commercial.
Hartung wasn't a commercial?
Not that spot where the apartments went was high density.
Farmland is, that
But you have
has that big business on it. So part of that was,
You're looking at the current use, we're looking at the future land use map.
well, the current.
So
use-
yeah.
The current use is gonna be.
And we can't tell a business that you can't develop. I mean, we can't tell Hartung, no, you can't sell land
Well, it would
for
have been.
development.
Yeah, but if we would have sit there and give a couple of ear tugs to a couple of big businesses and stuff, people looking to build big businesses, we have a big piece of wide open, property.
But then
okay, I didn't,
I will talk about this
yeah,
outside.
I didn't know, I didn't know
Take it
it was
outside.
over zoned high density. I didn't know it was set up for apartments already.
So on this one,
Yes,
if there was business park on the east side of Commerce Park, that would encompass the HDR, the MDR, and the OS. That gets us about close to 100 acres. That would abut then the Edgewood parcel to the east, which is what Al was talking about, right? If I understood his comments.
That's how I
And
understood it.
everything.
Yeah, if you took the portion where the HDR and the MDR are in this plan, kind of like with the green portion, all that's sort of east of that road right now is about 110 acres. The other portion of that, like the road there, we took a little bit of liberty with that bubble, so that's about those 3 30-acre lots kind of thing.
yeah, so what I'm hearing is this concept with east of Commerce Park, show that as business park. I could see the school site being described as preferred opportunity for a school, but if it were selected for another site in this area such as south of here, that likely would be an extension of medium density residential, potentially, you see to the south. What I'm hearing, I'm liking the idea maybe of the medium residential that's shown further south along Fitchburg in the southwest quadrant, and limiting the LDR just more internal to the east. So I guess, and then we actually we're resolving back to the northwest quadrant being similar to what was originally proposed, but then we're seeing the density elsewhere. So I guess what I'm hearing is that the changes is east of Commerce Park, and then an option of what that school could be if it isn't a school.
Can you call instead of a school a civic place?
Yeah, that would be, so in the future land use, we wouldn't necessarily put school, it's gonna be like, public and institutional kind of thing, so that'll include a school, and so what,
It could be a church.
it could be, so that fits in that
Yep.
land use as well. A church, a post office, I mean, there's like a ton of different sort of things that would fit that civic, like public and institutional use there. It's just the school has been the thing that's been expressed as most needed at this point.
I have a quick question, if that's okay. In our plan commission discussions, and I think among council too, it's been being discussed to add another category of density. So we would go from low to medium high to high. And what I'm wondering is, do we just want to take medium and move it up and still stay with just 3 and maybe put the end on medium at 20 or 30 units? What would you recommend if we were to do something like that?
Are you suggesting modifying what's already moving forward through approvals?
Well, we're talking about adding another category, because we have this demand for where people want to do a medium density, but our medium density doesn't go high enough to allow it, so then they have to move to high density. And then neighborhoods get generally concerned because they know that there's no end cap on the end of the high density because it goes 9 to infinity. So if we were talking about adding one in the middle where maybe medium goes 10 to 15 and then high density starts at 15, but I wonder if it just makes more sense to just boost medium up, to take it up to where you're not doing 5-story buildings and 3-story buildings and trying to keep, because I think that the goal, And what we're looking for is to find affordable housing for families to buy, and maybe not necessarily more giant apartment buildings to force a bunch of people into. And this would give us an opportunity to do some of those housings like you were talking about that you see in the high density where it's the row houses and there might be 10 of them or there might be 12 of them. And that's gonna be a much more affordable option for someone to purchase a home. And I think that's what everybody wants. That's the American dream. They wanna come in and buy something. So how can we create more of that in here? And if we moved medium up, we could make more of this medium versus high and maybe get a better goal, a higher goal. I mean, we aren't gonna have as many physical people living in there, but we're gonna have more home ownership opportunities, which I think is where our missing middle is. So, I mean, it's just, I don't know, I'd like to know what everybody else thinks of that idea.
I guess my initial gut reaction to that, when you stated, I keyed on one part of it where you said that the medium density right now does not allow for the unit count that they're looking for, and then they have to jump up to the other, is creating a medium high combined one gonna reach the count that they're talking about, or are they already still gonna have to go up to high density? Has it, I don't know what story has been discussed on the communication of what the number would make sense to meet that demand without having to get to where it just lets for endless size. That medium high might just, I should say the medium might not get used at all then, and so you just created a new one. So I'm saying maybe what you're suggesting might make sense, to not add another land use category where one which is not going to be used at all. Another thing to consider is maybe there is restriction on what that max should be on high density, and that there might be special unique cases, but there might be what we call something density bonus, that they're doing additional efforts beyond typical development that allow for that density to go up. So I would suggest it probably should just be, not trying to put a wrinkle in what you're already doing, is maybe you are increasing that range in medium density, but then you also create an endpoint for the high density without additional, like, are you doing more, bike parking, more trails in that development, adding a special amenity as part of it to get that extra bonus?
And we can kind of form this plan to link up with whatever the comprehensive plan says. So if it makes sense here to do, bump up the density of the medium density residential to match the medium high that's adopted, I think we can do that, and we can match it up with the comp plan in the text of the document. Because this will be, as you know, incorporated into the comp plan when it's adopted, so.
And we'll list densities, but we'll list the categories too, so like the category will go with the comp plan. If you change the density in the comp plan, like, this is just gonna be a snapshot that matches that. So like, if you adjust what high density residential is, typically it's assumed that if you approve it after, high density residential here would match what's in the comp plan kind of thing.
But I'll say there's gonna be additional policies in this plan, and typically you have the comp plan that's more general, and then you look to the neighborhood plans that it's appendix that gives additional direction at a more granular particle.
More granular.
And so those standards that might be restrictive or might open up a couple of sections, in my opinion, that would take precedent over the general policies of the comp plan.
Let me ask a question, because I experienced some of this planning issue with another neighborhood plan, do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to make this neighborhood plan flexible with the zoning. Because we don't know what is gonna happen in 10 years, you know what I mean? So I think if we start, this bubble should be flexible. We should be movable. We can, you know what I mean? It doesn't mean that we have this low density there and we need to stack with the low density and the southern part, you know what I mean? I think we need to think about how to make this neighborhood plan, we say, okay, this is all the density that we envision here, or this is the preferred density, but that doesn't mean we are excluding other density. And this is my issue with this neighborhood plan. Sometimes we get stuck to we decided that only 80 acres are gonna be high density and that's it. You know what I mean? I think we need to make this neighborhood plan zoning more flexible and thinking in the future, because now we're making decision for 10 years, maybe 10 years, I don't know, everyone wants to live in an apartment, I don't know, you know what I mean, or in townhomes, and the lower density, you know what I mean, that people want to live in a house and have the other house like, I don't know, half a mile from them, doesn't exist anymore. So I think we need to we need to allow some flexibility in this for the future, because I have seen it that sometimes people follow this neighborhood plan like a Bible. And then when you want to add something or make something a slightly different change, no. The neighborhood plan says that we need to start with this. And I don't want to see that in the next future neighborhood plan in the city. I think we need to add that flexibility that we can, in the future, when other council members, other mayors, they need to make decisions, we provide them with some flexibility. That's it.
Yeah,
I agree with Carol and the mayor. I think those are some good ideas, and I could support those.
yeah, it's always how far do you go with it? Because part of why you create a comp plan, the land use plan, is to have some buy-in and vetted process that when you buy a property adjacent to these areas, that the land use proposed is what has been approved. There is a process to amend, but it's, you have a public hearing and you have the full conversation that happens. But that's, I like the flexibility of the neighborhood mixed use. That's one thing I put in there and talked about, that could be commercial, that could be high density residential, could be standalone commercial, because of the market changes. I think when you start talking about residential component where people are buying properties, it gets a little more difficult to have significant flexibility on that. And it's already flexible to the point that LDR is allowing for single family up to 4 units types. And MDR, we talked about all the way up to, smaller multi-unit buildings. There is some built-in flexibility in those categories. I understand what you're saying. I just think it makes it harder for Plan Commission and council to make decisions if there's too much openness to it.
No, but here, in this case, we are offering most of the density are there. We have low, medium, high, I like this. But in previous neighborhood plan, they were like no high density at all, you know what I mean? And then when we want to bring a project to add some density, everything is no, you know what I mean? So this is what I like this plan, because in this plan, we offer all the options, you know what I mean?
Okay.
It's like we have all the options. Everyone, you want to build your home, but also we can have another area where we have more density or much more density, but we are offering all the options. No, it's stuck like this neighborhood plan also need to have only 2 density, low and medium.
Sure.
That one is something that it's going to be difficult to swallow to me, you know what I mean? And sometimes, we are offering the commercial and the industrial, you know what I mean? How to blend all of that together. But I think I like this plan because we have all the options there, you know what I mean? We are not limiting this area to 1 or 2 density, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood what you were saying, so, thank you. Yeah.
I think the whole problem is, it's probably the words, but yet, I think it goes back more to the ownership type, to be honest. If you had a 4-unit that was owned by owners and it was townhouses, you wouldn't have pushback, because people it seems like we're discriminating against renters. And I mean, I've said I think every neighborhood meeting should start with a poll. How many of you have started out in an apartment? And I bet 95% of the people will raise their hand. So, and then I would ask them, okay, you started in an apartment. Why can't Mike start in an apartment? Why can't Paul start in an apartment? I think that's kind of the messaging that we're sending. So I feel like there needs to be more education on what each one of these densities could look like, because we've been talking about a project where we're maybe double loading a lot where it could be considered medium to medium high density, and somebody might look at that and go, I don't want that. And if the condo market, if the financing changes where they don't have to have 75% pre-sold units, we could be looking at some really high density, and we're eliminating that. So I'm sorry I'm a little passionate about it, but we've been doing a lot of work on housing, and I feel like we're just tying our hands by the stigmatism that goes along with the name. So I don't know how we educate people on that. I mean, I can come and do a sermon at one of your meetings if you'd like, but we have older people that reach out to us and say, how come you don't have condos? I want to sell my big house and I want to move into a condo. How come you're not offering condos? So I'm a little concerned about it's not really about the name, it's more about the owner, if that makes sense. And I think the education needs to be, and it's not I try and educate people every day when they talk about high density. It's like, it's not necessarily apartments. And yes, we are deficient in a lot of units. And until we get units built, the prices are just going to keep going up and up and up. So I don't know how to fix that problem, but that to me seems like the problem.
And I agree with everything you're saying. The reality is that what we have to work through by law is we can't restrict by ownership.
Right,
Look
but
at
I
building
think
type.
that needs to be a point that needs to be brought up at every meeting that you host. That we're not just talking about the type of businesses, we're also, units, we're also talking about who can own them. Because that's what it seems like. It seems like there's a disconnect with the public, because that's, Mike and I hear it all the time. All we're building out here is apartments. And that's, and there's just, what's wrong with that? That's what we had available for land. That's why apartments went up.
And we don't have a big piece of land to build a neighborhood.
Right.
This is what we have, you know what I mean?
Or a business park.
And I don't think anybody's saying that we don't want some high density in this. I think what we're saying is we don't want all of it. And we also want to make sure that we have entry-level housing available for people who are ready to move out of their apartment, to have something that's reasonably sized that they can buy their first home. And that's what's lacking. And I'm also one of those seniors that has a big house I don't need. I can't move because of the financial realities of it right now. Why would I leave a 2.9 mortgage to go into 7, and pay a condo fee on top of it? I mean, there's certain realities that are pertinent now, and to Julia's point, in 10 years, we don't know what they'll be. But I still really like the goal of having smaller properties available in this neighborhood for people to buy, in conjunction with having apartments as well. And I had an apartment in a neighborhood that I loved, so I bought a house in that neighborhood. And I'm hoping that this can be that type of a neighborhood where, I'm ready to buy a house now because I want ownership and I want to be a permanent member of this community. And I can stay in my same neighborhood and still enjoy all the things I loved about my neighborhood and afford to stay there. So I think we have to balance all of it. And I agree with you. I mean, I basically was kicked off the plan commission because I supported a multifamily development that I knew we needed, because I knew what business was coming in and what level those executives were going to be. And there was no convincing that neighborhood that we needed it, because we needed for executive level people to live in.
And because the neighborhood plan was so
Correct.
strict and it was unflexible that the way it was designed. And this is what I experienced that too with you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I think we need to be more open-minded when we design the new neighborhood plan.
Yep, there are certain places where high density makes perfect sense for business reasons, for city reasons, for financial reasons. And I mean, obviously for social reasons, right now, we need it because there's a housing shortage. But there's also a shortage of houses for people that wanna buy and they don't have $500,000 or $400,000 to buy a house.
And that's a bigger conversation.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt, but for those, I'm not trying to blend the plans. I know that Brad covered it like at the last steering committee meeting going into housing, but at Greenfield, at the last committee meeting that they had back in February, Kurt Paulson, who's a housing expert, came and gave a talk. And so if you haven't seen it or aren't familiar with his work, he relates a lot of what's happening in the state and the country down to the Fitchburg level in terms of how many housing units are going to be needed, and people talking about like, well, there's a lot of pushback, and then people are like, well, we shouldn't build it here. Well, where's it going to go? Because you're talking about Prairie's already getting a lot of development, Verona's already getting development. Like you're going to need 7,000 units over the next like 20, 30 years here, on top of like Middleton's growing, Madison's growing. So everybody's kind of doing their part to pick up the housing shortage. You know, we're a couple 100,000 short across the state over the next 30 years. So it's going to be, we have to build quite a few homes to keep up with current demand on top of making up from the 2008, 2009 recession still. So
The last tidbit I'll add to that, in that conversation, it was asked about what there is desire for, which is that low density or medium density ownership condo development or townhomes, and the construction and the financial components are what's restrictive. It's not that there isn't a need from people wanting it, it's that there's so much red tape and cost that's restricted people wanting to develop it. There's more risk. So there's desire for it. So the only way I could suggest that it could happen more is more influx of communities supporting those type of developments. You could do some TIF statements on that type of development could get additional financing if that's an option. So that's the only thing I'll plug for that, if that's a major desire.
Okay, maybe. Yeah.
But go ahead and then we'll resolve.
Well, in Greenfield, people are moving out. They're also for sale because of the taxes. And they kind of complain about how Fitchburg's running into big metroplex of Madison, but taxes. And these, my house is 84 years old. It's gonna go up $1,000 in taxes next year for 2025. And people are just, we don't have brand new roads and blah, 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 as we get more services, the more your taxes go up, which is wrong. It's because of the price of land. And these houses that are for sale in Greenfield, they're selling for $300,000 above market. That shows how bad it is. Both of them sold. But I can't see low-cost housing, or affordable housing, I should say, anywhere in Fitchburg. Our land out here in Fitchburg, Dane County, is making everybody go to apartments. And I go to the restaurant down the road from you, and it's called Quick Trip. And you guys want good pizza Thursdays and Fridays. But I talk to the young kids coming in, I call them kids because you're at my age. And they're at the apartments by Quick Trip. They got Epic, and they got the state capitol, government work. And they got this other business over off of, used to be Rayovac. And I asked them, I says, eventually you're gonna move on. Oh no, we'll just move from apartment to apartment. As they build a brand new one, all the new amenities, they move and stuff. But we do have one good, I shouldn't say good, whatever. It's on the corner of Lacey and Siney. That apartment right there, complex. He's very rich and he's very nice. But he built that whole corner And it looks beautiful. It's a nice setup, and I got him all riled up when I told him I didn't want to see the apartments and I wanted pine trees all the way along the sign. But now that he's got it up and it's been there for a while, it is a nice setup. So if we could have apartments like that are on the corner of Sain and Lacey, I mean, you drive by it and you go, oh, no, you sit there and it's well built, well maintained. And
Well managed too.
Yeah, and
And smart code.
and with all the cars and the people going by over all that time and stuff, so they must have a lot of people living there. But I don't see very many moving in and moving out. So if we look for affordable, not affordable, but renting apartments and stuff, more of them like that, yeah, people will move into Fitchburg real quick.
I have a question. Can we do a smart code in this area?
The plan will have both options available.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
So again, I'll just say, we're getting close to the time. I think what I've heard is what we talked about, that kind of blending of option A with the business park, options for public institutional. Again, if that doesn't come to fruition, openness to medium density residential to extend north. Anyone want to speak against that direction initially as we move forward, is I guess where I want to land. If not, I feel that's where we're going to take the next step.
For option A.
Option A with Business Park east of Commerce Park Drive, and the school option being more, it could be a public use, or it could also be medium density residential extension.
I would say that, I was gonna comment on, typically the way we show that is like a hatch or like a checker pattern that has both colors or something associated with it. So it's you can do some overlay or alternative uses there that are similar to scale.
And the narrative gets to that flexibility and the intent of it, so that would be in the plan.
Yeah, I was just looking at the zoning code, and so like there's multiple categories of residential in the zoning code that would probably fit under each of those bigger planning categories of the land uses of low density, medium density, high density. So there'll be a ton of, there'll be a list of the appropriate zoning categories that fit with those land uses to kind of choose from.
So we'll present that at our focus group for this neighborhood, because we're presenting both neighborhoods. If we hear anything that suggests any major modification, what we just talked about, that's where we would follow up. Well, it's a good conversation, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you.